Today we're going to continue with Chapter 15, Between the World Wars. And we're going to cover Section 2, Totalitarian States, and we're going to focus on Stalin and Mussolini. Now, the period after World War I will see totalitarian governments appear in Russia, Italy, and Germany. They'll be based on the ideologies of communism and fascism. After World War I, most of the countries of Europe had democratic governments. There was a growth of civil liberties and freedoms. Women received the right to vote. Woodrow Wilson said the Great War had been fought to make the world safe for democracies. In 1919, it looked like Wilson was justified in saying this. Unfortunately, this would not last. By 1939, 20 years later, only Great Britain and France had true democratic governments. Totalitarian states grew out of World War I when governments limited individual freedoms to gain victory in the war. This period saw the growth of the totalitarian state. They used violent political repression and intense propaganda to gain complete power. The government's aim was to control the political, economic, social, and even cultural lives of its citizens. Totalitarian states want to control the minds of its citizens. Mass propaganda techniques using new modern technology, like the radio. Communism and fascism both rejected democracy and liberal values. They believed the individual was not important except what they contribute to the state. The state, or the government, was more important than anything. We've always heard from coaches, there is no I in team. Now that works for sports teams, but not for societies. Charismatic leaders typically dominated the totalitarian state. Stalin in the Soviet Union, Mussolini in Italy, and Hitler in Germany. They created political parties dedicating to promoting idealized visions of collective harmony. They used force to intimidate and destroy political opposition, policies of military expansion to exploit other countries, and social engineering to replace the individual with a unified people, exercising a collective will, basically getting everyone to think the same way. Now, communism and fascism shared the desire to recreate the state and society, but they were also very different. Communism wanted a brotherhood of workers, anti-capitalism, and private ownership of property. They believed in equality of everyone, to destroy the class system, to spread their ideals to create world communism. Now, fascism is not a single unifying set of beliefs, unlike Marxism. It was a term used to describe any authoritarian government that's not communist. They believe in extreme nationalism, very racist, believed in the superiority of their race. They believed in racial purity. They believed in loyalty to the state, and they glorified war and the military. They were enemies of socialist and communist. Now, first we're going to look at Stalin's Soviet Union. In 1921, Lenin and the communists win the Russian Civil War. We talked about that during the Russian Revolution section. But the economic problems in Russia continued. There were droughts and famine, and millions died. People were tired. Many wanted to return to the czars. The Soviet Union was on the verge of total collapse. Lenin had to do something. So he changes everything. He institutes what's called the New Economic Policy, or NEP. Large industries and corporations would remain under government control. However, he allowed some small businesses to remain private. Now, Soviet farming and industry production rose, and the Soviet Union is saved from total disaster. However, Lenin saw the NEP as only being temporary. Now in 1924, Lenin dies suddenly without a named successor. He suffered a stroke. Here is his tomb outside the Kremlin wall. Lenin is inside in a glass coffin. I don't know. Don't know how they keep him. He died in 1924, and he still looks like that today. Now, Joseph Stalin, who Lenin never liked, and Lenin had written letters, please don't let this man take over after me. Stalin wins a power struggle among the 7-member Politburo. The Politburo, which I remember hearing in newspapers and on the news into the 1980s, is the ruling committee of the Communist Party. Now, there was a fight between Leon Trotsky and Joseph Stalin, but Stalin won it over because many young communists hated Lenin's idea of the NEP, and Stalin promised to end it. So let's talk about Stalin and the Communist Soviet Union. By 1927, Joseph Stalin becomes the absolute leader of the Soviet Union. He kills, and I mean kills, anyone he feels is a threat to his power. Now, he creates these, what they call 5-year plans. Now, the Stalinist era was the beginning of an economic, social, and political revolution. Stalin does keep his promise and ends the NEP and starts the first 5-year plan. This would be the first of many. And the 5-year plan was to build up the economy. These were economic goals for a 5-year period. In 1928, they build up the Soviet Union into an industrial power. Steel, oil production increases dramatically. But little was done for the workers. They're living in terrible living conditions. In 1929, Stalin starts a process called collectivization. He eliminated all the private farms and forced everyone to live on large government farms. All land now was owned by the state. 26 million family farms were collectivized into 250,000 state-owned farms. This is going to lead to a disaster. Farmers rebelled. There was a cost to Stalin's programs. Farmers retaliated by hoarding crops. Stalin had his soldiers take the food, which led to famines that killed millions. In the famines of 1932 to 33, it was estimated that millions of peasants died. Stalin created a man-made famine in the Ukraine. It killed between 3 and 3.5 million people. The other goal was to destroy any idea of Ukrainian independence. After the fall of the communism in 1991, Ukraine did gain its independence. But we hear in the news, the conflicts between Ukraine and Russia continue to this day. Most Ukrainians hate Russia. Now, Stalin needed to have complete control over the Soviet Union. The secret police, the NKVD, was used by Stalin to use terror to control the population. Anyone appearing disloyal to the state is arrested. They're either murdered or sent to what they call gulags. These were labor camps out in Siberia. Stalin eliminated the old revolutionary Bolsheviks. Anyone associated with Lenin, he had killed. Large show trials were staged for leaders who Stalin distrusted. Most were found guilty and executed. Trotsky escaped to Mexico City, but in 1940, Stalin sent assassins and they murdered him there. Now, Nikolai Yezhov, he was the leader of the NKVD, the secret police responsible for the purges that for Stalin, until Stalin had him purged and shot in 1940. He even had the pictures retouched to eliminate Yezhov from the photograph, as if he never existed. Now we're going to look at Mussolini and fascism in Italy. In the early 20th century, Italy is a liberal constitutional monarchy with many civil rights, which was moving towards democracy. It was led by King Victor Emmanuel III. He was the grandson of the famous Victor Emmanuel II. He became king in 1900 when his father died, and he abdicated in 1946. This was after World War II. He abdicated in favor of his son. He was hoping to keep the monarchy in place in Italy. There was a major election whether to abolish it or not. Him abdicating didn't do any good because Italy voted to abolish the monarchy anyway, so his son had a very short rule. He did leave. He went to Egypt, and he died the following year. All right, let's look at some of the problems that Italy had. The population was mostly poor, especially in agriculturally southern and Sicily. And the Catholic Church was very strong, and there was a lot of tense relations between the church and the government. And of course, that goes back to the unification when the Italian government took away the papal states from the church. Now, in 1915, Italy joined the Allies. In 1918, they defeated the Austrian-Hungarians at the Battle of Vittorio Veneto. This helped bring the war to an end. But during the war, more than 650,000 Italian soldiers died. Gotta love those helmets they're wearing with the feathers on them. Now, in 1919, at the signing of the Versailles Treaty, Italy is outraged. They received very little. Italy had fought with the Allies, but they received very little from the treaty. They were promised more by France and Britain to join them at the start of the war. They felt they fought a war for nothing. At home, there was a lot of unrest. There were strikes, high unemployment. Farmers rebelled, workers went on strike, and the soldiers coming back from the war faced high unemployment. And the Italian government is in total chaos. Now, during the chaos, a World War I veteran emerges, Benito Mussolini. He was born on July 29, 1883, in a small town in northern Italy. There he is in his World War I uniform. He fought in the Italian army. In 1919, at the age of 35, he organizes veterans and discontented Italians, and he creates a new political party, which he calls the Fascist Party. It takes its name from the old Roman fasces, which was their symbol of authority. It's actually a bundle of rods that are wrapped together with leather straps with an axe on it. These would be symbolic of punishments you might get if you broke laws in ancient Rome. Obviously, you know what the axe was used for. He promised to replace chaos with order and return Italy to the greatness of the old Roman Empire. Now we'll talk about Mussolini's rise to power. He gains power by using his supporters, these fascist gangs called black shirts, because that's what they wore. They were known as the Camisci Nere. They were very intimidating, though I can't see this bunch here, especially that little guy on the left, but you never know. He could be a psychopath. They used fear, intimidation, and spread violence. They broke up socialist meetings. They destroyed leftist newspapers. They intimidated any politician who spoke out against Mussolini. Now, most Italians accepted it because they were tired of the weak government. Now, the March on Rome. In 1922, in Naples, Mussolini calls for a march on Rome. Tens of thousands fascists swarm into Rome to await Mussolini's arrival. Here's a picture of Mussolini and his four top supporters. They were known as the Quadriumvirs. There would be the four men to help Mussolini come to power, and this photograph is of them about to start on their march to Rome. I really like this photograph. I kind of looked up to find out about these men. The man on the far left, that's Michel Bianchi. He didn't last very long. He wasn't a very healthy man, and his poor health eventually killed him I think it was 8 years after this picture was taken. He was only 46 years old. The man who's to the right of Mussolini in the photograph with the nice mustache-beard combination, his hair kind of slicked back, staring intently at Mussolini, is Italo Balbo. He would eventually become the governor of the colony of Libya. Interesting story there. During the war, he flew back to Tobruk. The Italian garrison at Tobruk was just attacked by the British, being, World War II had started. And when Balbo's plane came in, they thought it was a British plane attacking him, and they shot him down and killed everyone on board. Now, the man on the far right is Cesare Maria Del Vecchio. He's the man. It looks like he's got a little hair thing going on there, but no, that's actually somebody who's actually standing behind him. He was totally bald. He supported him. But in 1943, there was a large coup in Italy among the fascist leaders after Mussolini had lost North Africa and Sicily, and he voted, along with about a good amount of the fascist leaders, to remove Mussolini from power and replace him with someone else. When Mussolini was freed by the Germans and went to the north, he had a number of these men rounded up to put on trial. Maria Del Vecchio was one of them that he wanted rounded up, but he wasn't there. He'd escaped to Argentina. He returned to Italy, and he died there in 1959. The other guy is the guy with the white beard. On the left side of Mussolini in the photograph, Emilio Di Bono. He was the oldest of the five. He would lead forces in Ethiopia, though he was opposed to Italy joining World War II. In 1943, he was also one of the group that voted to have Mussolini ousted. Unfortunately, Mussolini got his hands on him. He was put on trial. He was only 77 years old at the time, but he was found guilty, and they put him in front of a wall and shot him. Here they all are marching out. There is Di Bono on the far left with that very distinctive white beard. Cesare Maria Del Vecchio with his bald head. And then, of course, to Mussolini's right is Balbo. So it doesn't really look like they plan on marching very far. If you look at Mussolini's shoes, it looks like he's wearing his dress shoes and a very fancy suit. Naples is quite a distance from Rome, so I guess this is just for a publicity shot. Anyway, the fear of civil war caused King Victor Emmanuel III to ask Mussolini to be the prime minister. Victor Emmanuel did not like socialism either. Here we see a picture of Mussolini, a very rare picture of Mussolini smiling, addressing the throngs of crowds of fascist supporters in Rome. Now, Mussolini's power will grow in Italy. As its prime minister, Mussolini will create a fascist dictatorship. He moved slowly for 2 years, consolidating power, but by 1925, Mussolini had seized all power as the leader of Italy. He eliminated civil rights like freedom of speech and freedom of the press. He had his opponents jailed, exiled, or even murdered. He even took the title El Duce, which means the leader. Italy was still a parliamentary monarchy, but it was really a dictatorship. Now, what was fascist Italy like under Mussolini? Well, it was a totalitarian rule. Mussolini actually had built the first totalitarian state. He didn't have as absolute power as Stalin or Hitler had, though. The individual was unimportant except to help the state. The big slogan that was put up on posters all around Italy was believe, obey, fight. Men were trained to be soldiers for Italy. Children were put into fascist youth groups, also taught to be. This was a photograph in Life magazine showing young Italian boys, 8, 9, 10 years old, training with rifles to become soldiers. In 1929, Mussolini made a deal with the Catholic Church. This was known as the Lateran Treaty. And this creates Vatican City. In exchange, Pope Pius XI recognized the fascist government. And this gives Mussolini the support of the Catholic Church. All right, that ends our section on totalitarian rule, Mussolini and Stalin. I hope you enjoyed it, interesting as it was. And have a good day and enjoy your weekend. Bye-bye.